For 3 decades, America fell asleep to the same rhythm: a desk, a couch, a sly smile, and a host who never lost control. Johnny Carson interviewed more than 22,000 people, but only a handful made him forget there were millions watching. These weren't just famous guests, they were the rare few who reached the man behind the desk. A producer once said, "When they came on, Johnny stopped hosting and started enjoying himself." That's our map tonight: 9 names, 9 keys to the parts of Carson we almost never saw. The first key is a quiet one. Not a punchline, not a trick, just a poem about a dog. When Jimmy Stewart visited in 1981 and read Beau, Carson's famously steady demeanor faltered. He didn't break the tension, he didn't chase the laugh, he just felt it. The room went still, and for once television did the bravest thing it can do: nothing. From that moment, Stewart's name occupied a different place on Johnny's list, and once you see why, the other 8 fall into place like numbers on a dial. Jimmy Stewart didn't do talk shows. He wandered through them like a neighbor pausing at your fence. He searched for words, he let the silence breathe. That unvarnished honesty hit Johnny where polish never could. Carson admired stars who weren't performing a version of themselves, and Stewart brought the real thing. Hesitations, soft chuckles, the careful reach for the right phrase. It felt like a reminder that television could still be human, not just bright. Then came the poem. Stewart pulled out Beau, a simple remembrance of his dog, and read it the way people say goodbye when there's nothing clever left to try. Carson hinged to control, allergic to melodrama, didn't break the spell with a joke. His eyes glossed, his voice lowered, and he let the grief sit between them. That moment rewired the room. Viewers didn't see a host managing beats, they saw a man allowing feeling to exist on live TV. From that night on, Stewart's name carried weight inside the building. If he was booked, Carson quietly asked for room to breathe, nudge a break, stretch a segment, make space for whatever might happen. Producers called those interviews perfect television. Not because they were showy, but because they were true. Stewart's authenticity didn't chase applause, it earned trust. Johnny valued that more than any monologue laugh. Most guests tried to match Carson's speed. Stewart slowed him down. He turned the Tonight Show from a machine into a porch light. And in that warmth, Carson let the audience see the part of himself he kept hidden behind timing and wit. Stewart opened the door with nothing but decency and a poem, and Johnny never forgot who gave him permission to be still. If Stewart gave Carson permission to slow down, Bob Newhart gave him the opposite gift: rhythm. Newhart's humor was dry, understated, almost whispered, but it came with perfect timing. He never marched in with a prepackaged set of jokes. He let conversations unfold, spinning everyday absurdities into comedy with the ease of a man doodling on a napkin. That style meshed seamlessly with Carson, who thrived on quick interplay. Together, they built laughter not out of punchlines, but out of pauses and shared beats. Watching them was like watching 2 jazz musicians riffing in perfect sync. What made Newhart stand out from other comedians was how natural he felt. Many comics treated The Tonight Show as a stage to reheat old material, but Newhart treated it as a living room. He'd start a story, Johnny would slip in the exact right aside, and suddenly both men were surfing the same wave of timing. Crew members remember Carson's subtle hand signal to the control room: stretch, hold the break, because he never wanted to cut Bob short. When most guests were being counted down to the second, Newhart was the rare exception allowed to run long. Carson's respect wasn't only about craft. He noticed Newhart's humility, the way he carried himself off camera. No demands, no handlers, no ego. He greeted pages by name, thanked the makeup crew, remembered faces years later. Johnny hated prima donnas. Bob was the opposite: grounded, professional, grateful. For Carson, that mattered as much as what happened under the lights. Comedy might be timing, but respect was character, and Bob had both. The bond eventually pushed beyond the studio. Johnny invited Bob to play golf, a gesture he reserved for only a few. For a man who guarded his private life as fiercely as Carson did, that was proof of genuine affection. With Newhart, Carson wasn't just the Tonight Show host. He was a peer, a friend, someone who could sit back and laugh without measuring the clock. And after such measured, effortless comedy, the stage was primed for someone entirely different: the unpredictable mischief of Burt Reynolds. When Burt Reynolds walked onto Carson's stage, the atmosphere changed instantly. Most stars came to promote, Burt came to play. He understood that late-night magic wasn't about reciting talking points, it was about unpredictability. Reynolds thrived on it. He'd stash a prank in his jacket, spring a surprise mid-conversation, or push Johnny into unscripted laughter that no producer could plan. One night it was shaving cream, another it was a sly comeback about his personal life, but the effect was always the same. Johnny's grin stretched wider, the room felt alive, and viewers leaned closer because they didn't know what might happen next. Carson adored real surprise. He could sniff out the fake "I didn't expect that question" routine that so many celebrities rehearsed, but Burt's antics were genuine. Reynolds didn't just take risks. He did so with the confidence that Johnny would join the mischief rather than shut it down. Their banter turned into a friendly duel, each man throwing playful jabs to see who would break first. The Tonight Show wasn't just an interview when Burt was around. It was a stage for two sharp minds testing each other in front of millions. What made the dynamic work was Reynolds' ability to take a joke as easily as he threw one. When Carson teased him about box office flops or high-profile romances, Burt laughed harder than the audience. He never bristled, never got defensive, and Johnny valued that enormously. For Carson, a guest's true test wasn't how well they could deliver lines, it was how well they could absorb them. Reynolds passed with flying colors. He gave as good as he got, and in doing so, he won Johnny's respect. Behind the curtain, producers and crew knew Reynolds was a different kind of guest. Johnny referenced him often as an example for others. Just relax and have fun with it, like Burt does. That was Carson's highest praise. Reynolds represented the side of late night rarely seen spontaneity without ego, chaos without bitterness. He didn't just sit on the couch, he turned it into an arena where Johnny could drop his guard and enjoy himself. And after all that high-energy mischief, the stage shifted again, this time toward intellect as Orson Welles pulled Johnny into deeper waters. Orson Welles wasn't just another guest, he was a portal into a different version of Johnny Carson. When Welles was scheduled, Johnny prepared differently. He read, he thought about history, theater, literature, subjects he rarely touched on air. This wasn't the usual dance of anecdotes and promotions, it was Carson's chance to flex a part of himself most viewers never saw. With Orson across from him, Johnny became not only a host but a curious student, eager to spar intellectually with one of the sharpest minds of the century. Their conversations meandered into places late-night TV almost never dared to go. They discussed Shakespeare, the art of illusion, and the brutal realities of Hollywood politics. Johnny listened with a mix of awe and delight, occasionally dropping his own insights that revealed just how widely read he really was. Viewers who only knew Carson as the quick quip artist suddenly glimpsed depth, an inquisitive mind hungry for more than laughs. For once, the laughter wasn't the goal, discovery was. And then came the magic. Welles wasn't only a filmmaker and raconteur, he was a practiced magician. On air, he performed illusions so complex that even Carson, a lifelong hobbyist of magic, was stunned. One trick left Johnny's jaw open, as if he were a boy in a carnival tent again. During a commercial break, he even turned to the audience and said, "That was real magic, not TV magic." That childlike wonder rarely surfaced in public, but Orson had the power to pull it out. What Johnny valued most, though, was Welles's candor. Despite his legendary reputation, Orson spoke openly about failures, abandoned projects, and the brutal turns of a career that refused to follow anyone's script. That honesty resonated with Carson, who despised Hollywood's spin. Welles reminded him that authenticity wasn't just an act, it was a choice. And in those conversations, Carson wasn't simply the Tonight Show host keeping the laughter flowing. He was a man savoring rare, nourishing company. From intellect and artistry, the story flowed next into pure lineage, the man who taught Johnny his most enduring comedic lesson, Jack Benny. For Johnny Carson, Jack Benny wasn't just a guest, he was the foundation. Everything about Carson's style, from the perfectly timed pause to the subtle smirk that drew a bigger laugh than any punchline, traced back to Benny. Johnny once admitted privately, "He was the reason I do what I do." That reverence was obvious every time Benny sat in the chair. The normally composed Carson shifted into something closer to an eager student, laughing more openly, listening more carefully, almost stepping aside to let the master work. Benny's genius lay in silence. He could pull a laugh without saying a word, simply by holding the beat and letting the audience fill the space. Carson absorbed that lesson early in his career and built his entire comedic philosophy around it. When Benny appeared on The Tonight Show, Johnny showed his respect in a way that surprised even his crew. He would tell directors to favor Benny's reactions over his own. For a host who built his career on being the center of late night, that was unheard of. But for Benny, Carson made the exception gladly. The symbolism went deeper than broadcast choices. In his private office, Carson kept almost no celebrity memorabilia, no autographed photos, no wall of famous faces. Just one framed picture of Jack Benny. It was a quiet shrine, a reminder of the lineage Carson carried with him each night on air. That solitary photograph said more than words ever could. Here was the man who showed Johnny that restraint could be funnier than force, that humility could own a stage. When Benny visited, it felt like the torch being passed in real time. The elder statesman of comedy, born in the vaudeville era, sitting across from the man who reinvented late night for television. Carson's deference was palpable, but it wasn't weakness, it was gratitude. And once the teacher had his due, Johnny could relax again, ready to enjoy himself with the friends who brought warmth rather than lessons. That's where Carol Burnett enters the story. Carol Burnett brought something rare to Carson's stage: ease. The moment she walked out, Johnny's famously tight posture softened. His shoulders relaxed, his grin widened, and the invisible wall he usually kept between himself and his guests dissolved. Their conversations didn't feel like interviews, they felt like two friends catching up in front of millions. With most guests, Johnny was the host and they were the visitor. With Carol, they were equals, and the audience felt that difference instantly. Unlike many stars who clung to carefully rehearsed talking points, Burnett thrived on spontaneity. She'd veer off script, tease Johnny directly, or even flip the format by interviewing him. Carson, who controlled most interactions with surgical precision, trusted her completely. He knew that wherever Carol went, the result would be entertaining and respectful. That kind of trust was almost unheard of on The Tonight Show, and it revealed just how much faith Johnny had in her instincts. Her warmth wasn't reserved for Johnny alone, it extended to everyone on set. Crew members remembered how she greeted them by name, asked about their families, and genuinely listened. She treated the makeup artist and the camera operator with the same respect she gave Carson, and Johnny noticed. He had little patience for pretentiousness, and Carol's lack of ego made her shine even brighter in his eyes. It was no surprise that when she appeared, Carson often waved off the countdown clock, extending her segments even if it meant bumping other guests. Burnett's appearances became a kind of litmus test for what Carson valued most in television: authenticity, generosity, and fun. She didn't just make the host laugh, she made him comfortable, a much rarer achievement. For viewers, those episodes felt lighter, sunnier, as though Carson himself had stepped out from behind the desk to simply enjoy a friend. After all that brightness, the show shifted again, to a guest who embodied something Johnny also prized: quiet, grounded masculinity without the Hollywood pretense. Entered James Garner. James Garner never acted like a movie star when he sat in Carson's chair, and that was precisely why Johnny valued him. While many guests arrived polished and rehearsed, Garner carried himself with a down-to-earth candor that stripped away Hollywood's pretense. He told stories about making The Great Escape or filming Maverick as if he were chatting about an ordinary workday, mixing in practical jokes, mistakes, and the kind of behind-the-scenes humanity most actors avoided. To Carson, who despised phoniness, that honesty was gold. Garner wasn't performing James Garner the celebrity, he was just being James. Off-camera, Garner's respect for the crew set him apart even more. He showed up without an entourage, shook hands with pages, thanked camera operators, and treated makeup artists like old friends. Carson paid close attention to how guests behaved when they thought no one important was watching, and Garner passed that quiet test every time. To Johnny, those small gestures revealed more character than any carefully crafted anecdote ever could. Authenticity wasn't just something Garner projected, it was how he lived. On air, the chemistry between the two men felt less like host and guest, more like buddies ribbing each other over coffee. Carson would toss in a sly jab, maybe about a failed project or a Hollywood dust-up, and Garner would grin and roll with it. There was no defensiveness, no star's ego on display. That easygoing nature allowed Johnny to drop his own guard, creating conversations that felt refreshingly natural in a world of forced promotion. Garner didn't need to dominate the couch. His presence alone grounded the show. What made Garner particularly special was his ability to bridge generations. Older viewers loved hearing stories about the golden age of Hollywood, while younger ones connected with his modern, approachable attitude. He could reference legends like Steve McQueen or Julie Andrews without ever sounding like he was bragging. For Carson, Garner embodied what a star should be: successful without arrogance, talented without vanity. And after spending time with that unpretentious authenticity, Carson was ready to turn toward a different kind of legend altogether. The one who proved comedy could sharpen, not fade with age: George Burns. George Burns carried with him something Johnny Carson admired above almost anything else: longevity. By the time he was appearing regularly on The Tonight Show, Burns was well into his 80s and 90s, yet he never coasted on old routines. Instead, he arrived with fresh material, sharp timing, and the same twinkle that had carried him from vaudeville to radio to television. Carson, who prided himself on professionalism and precision, looked at Burns as living proof that comedy could not only survive age but improve with it. Watching George deliver a line in his 90s with the crispness of a man half his age left Johnny in awe. Carson's respect showed in how he handled the interviews. Normally, he was a conductor, guiding conversations, slipping in jokes, keeping the pace. With Burns, Johnny often leaned back, asked one question, and then let the legend take over. Sometimes he went minutes without saying a word, simply watching George work the audience. For a host who usually inserted himself every few beats, that kind of deference was extraordinary. It was Johnny's way of silently acknowledging, "Here is a master, and I won't step on his rhythm." Behind the scenes, Carson's admiration deepened. During commercial breaks, when most hosts would reset with producers, Johnny stayed locked in on Burns, peppering him with questions about the old vaudeville circuits, the comedians of the 1920s and 30s, the shows that had shaped him as a boy. Crew members called it a private masterclass, a chance for Carson to connect with the very roots of his craft. Those quiet moments mattered to Johnny as much as the laughs that went out over the airwaves. Burns himself recognized the special treatment. He once said, "If Johnny Carson likes you, you're bulletproof." And Carson did more than like him. He revered him. Burns embodied everything Johnny aspired to be: sharp, professional, resilient, and effortlessly funny, even as time tried to blunt everyone else. In Burns, Carson saw the ultimate example of how to carry comedy across a lifetime. And after honoring the craft's longevity, it was only fitting that Carson's final favorite guest embodied television royalty itself, Lucille Ball. When Lucille Ball appeared on The Tonight Show, the energy shifted in a way that was different from anyone else. Carson, normally the center of gravity, deferred to her without hesitation. He laughed more freely, leaned in more closely, and even gave her the camera angles usually reserved for himself. To Johnny, Lucy wasn't just another guest. She was television royalty, the woman who had redefined the sitcom and proven that comedy could carry both heart and business savvy. Their on-air chemistry radiated mutual respect, two pioneers recognizing each other's weight in the medium. One of their most memorable moments came in 1973, when Carson surprised Lucy with footage from her earliest screen test. For a brief second, she was visibly moved, eyes shimmering before she masked it with a quick quip. That blend of vulnerability and humor captured everything Johnny loved about her, authentic emotion handled with grace, never manipulation. Carson didn't exploit the moment, he honored it, and in doing so, he revealed the rare trust Lucy placed in him to hold her unguarded. But Carson admired more than her comedy. He marveled at her mind. As the head of Desilu Productions, Ball had broken barriers in an industry run almost entirely by men. She wasn't just a star, she was a builder, producing shows like Star Trek and Mission Impossible, while continuing to perform. Johnny, who understood the grueling weight of running a television empire, often said privately that Lucy was the smartest person in television. He respected her not only as the funniest woman in the business, but as a strategist who knew how to shape it. Her appearances often ran long, Johnny waving off producers who tried to signal wrap-ups. He simply wanted more time with her. Off-air, he spoke of her resilience, her work ethic, and her refusal to let either fame or hardship erode her craft. For Carson, Lucille Ball was the complete package. Talent without ego, strength without arrogance, and vision that outlasted an era. She was the perfect closing note to his list of favorite guests. A reminder that comedy, when paired with intelligence and grit, could change the face of television itself. 9 guests, 9 doorways. Stewart cracked the armor with tenderness. Newhart tuned the rhythm. Reynolds invited mischief. Welles opened the library. Benny revealed the blueprint. Burnett switched off the tension. Garner brought the decency. Burns stretched time. Ball wore the crown and taught the ledger. Together they formed the shortest list in a career of long nights, the people who let Johnny Carson be more than Johnny Carson. Here's the secret, the show quietly taught for 30 years. Great hosts don't dominate the moment, they disappear into it, so the moment can breathe. Carson's favorites weren't just entertaining, they were revealing. They pulled back the curtain on a man who spent a lifetime keeping one closed, and for a few minutes at a time, they made America feel like it was sitting on the couch too.